We've been discussing the sexual assault allegations against the Hollywood producer Harvey Weinstein again this morning. Now, in France, they have brought forward proposals for on-the-spot fines for wolf whistling. So, this morning, we are asking, should wolf whistling be banned? To discuss this, we have the women's writer at The Telegraph, Radhika Sangani, and the assistant editor of Spiked, Ella Whelan. They are in our central London studio for us this morning. Good morning to you both. So, wolf whistling, where do we stand on that? Radhika, if somebody wolf whistles at you, what do you think?
Oh, I absolutely hate it. You know, like many women, it's happened to me my whole life. I remember the first time was when I was still wearing primary school uniform. Personally, I often feel really distressed. I absolutely hate it. I feel really uncomfortable. And depending on how severe it is, I can feel really threatened and quite scared.
Ella, what about you? If you were wolf whistled at in the street, do you have a similar reaction to Radhika?
Different strokes for different folks. I tend to roll my eyes or come up with something quick and hopefully witty to say back to the person who's behaving badly. On the topic of banning it, though, I think that makes me feel really nervous, not only because the idea of having a fine to deal with this seems like the completely wrong way to go about enacting social change, but also it just seems completely impractical. How would you do that without, having police on every street corner watching every interaction that a woman has on the road? I think it's a very bad idea.
Well, we have on-the-spot fines, Ella, for using your mobile phone at the wheel, for people who don't pick up after their dogs. Why should this be treated like that? Because Radhika made a really good point there, that it's young girls, underage girls, are sometimes wolf whistled at. That isn't acceptable.
No, it's not acceptable at all. I don't think anyone would argue it's acceptable, but it's the way that we deal with it which I think is important. So it's first of all important to note that this isn't happening all the time, that society has changed, that we do find it completely socially unacceptable to do these kind of things to women, to be pervy, to make unwanted comments on the street. And while it still happens, I think that the best way to deal with that, in the rare instances that it happens, is for women to stand up for themselves, to feel empowered to take things into their own hands, and for the rest of society to support them. I think once we start asking the authorities and the police to get involved in women's private lives in this and at this level, it really gets my back up, because that's never the answer.
I think what you're saying works really in an ideal world, but to be honest, I feel like so many women like myself aren't able to do that. You know, sometimes I wish I was more confident and able to do that, but I just don't think the onus should always be on the victim to have to speak up. And I do disagree that it's still a rare occurrence. You know, a recent study from End Violence Against Women, they found that 18 to 24-year-olds, out of their 85%, have received unwanted sexual comments on the street, and 45 had received unwanted sexual touching. So it is still a huge problem, and I just don't think that we should expect women to have to stand up for themselves and be the ones to end this problem.
Yeah, Ella, is it less about enforcing this and more about setting a tone to say that this isn't acceptable behaviour? Somebody has to, make some kind of rule that men would maybe think twice about doing it in the street to somebody they don't know.
I think in doing that, you're making two very uncomfortable insinuations. And the first is that women shouldn't be the ones to deal with this. Now, the feminist movement of past, women's liberation movements of past, said that women were strong and capable enough to deal with the bad things that happened in society. They took the onus on themselves to march and protest and change the world, and they did, and that's why we live in a more free and equal society. So the idea that women shouldn't have to deal with this is completely wrong. Women and men and everyone else in society has to take onus on themselves to deal with bad behaviour when it comes, and to change bad behaviour and to argue with people. And the second is this idea that we need a rule to make men not behave badly. The majority of men, certainly in this country, certainly in France probably, are not kind of lechers, are not waiting for their opportunity to shout rude things at little girls. It's just completely untrue. I'd be very sceptical about the kind of surveys and the data on this, because it often is, playing into a hyping up of the danger that women get put in, when actually we're in a very good place. More could be done, but the way that we deal with that and the way that we address existing instances of sexism has to be approached very carefully, because this really, I think, is just undermining women's freedom.
Radhika, we are coming at this from a place where we are saying women are upset by this, but that's not the general rule. Some women see it as a compliment.
Of course, and I fully, I've spoken to some women, especially of different generations, who enjoy it sometimes, and that's absolutely fine, but the vast majority of people do feel uncomfortable, I personally think. And secondly, the fact is that we need to accept that everybody's got different opinions on this, and for the people who do feel really threatened and uncomfortable, they should be, we have these measures in place for them. And if what I personally think is a great idea is something like what Nottingham Police Force has done, where they've classified wolf whistling and unwanted sexual comments as a hate crime. So it's no dramatic change to the law, there's no on-the-spot fines, it's nothing so drastic as that, but it's just a simple change in a definition which allows women to report the incident, and it allows police to investigate them and support those women.
OK, shoe on the other foot. I've just had this tweet in from Liam Summers. He said, so in that case, if the shoe was on the other foot, should hen nights be banned, Ella? Because there's a lot of wolf whistling and a lot more that goes on those, targeting men.
I think I've probably shouted at guys on the street when I was a teenager. Obviously, it's a bit different from a grown man shouting at a young girl. But I think really what this is under, that's a great example of how I think destructive about social relations this is. To have, I think what happened in Nottinghamshire was absolutely scandalous. To have catcalling and wolf whistling classed as a hate crime. You could go to jail for doing that. That's completely dystopian. The whole thing about this is it's inviting the authorities, inviting the police, inviting the state into our personal interactions, when these things can be and should be ironed out between individuals and between members of the public. This is not something for the police. When things get serious, that's when it's something for the police.
Yeah,
I think we're in danger of... I think we're in just quickly.
Yeah,
I think we're in danger of painting a really patronising view of women here. Radhika has said that okay, some women like it, but some women don't. We're inviting the police to get involved in something that some women might not like. That is really dangerous.
I think what we're doing here is sending a message, and this is the big reason why I do think it's important for authorities to get involved and not just sit by and let women.
But is there another way to do it, Radhika, other than criminalising these men? I mean,
I personally do think criminalising is a bit extreme, but what Nottingham's doing is not an actual drastic change in law. It's just
criminalising speech.
It's allowing women to report it, and women need to be able to feel comfortable to report these crimes because it's all part of a wider culture. And if men feel like they can, make comments to women on the street that make them feel threatened and uncomfortable, then that's just suggesting that the next step of sexual assault is acceptable.
OK, Radhika Sangani and Ella Whelan, the only whistle you're hearing on Sunrise this morning is the final whistle because we have run out of time. Thank you both very much indeed. Keep your thoughts coming in.